The taste of promethium still burns my throat when I remember that final salute. My name is Commissar Thaddeus Varn, formerly of the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment, currently condemned. I pulled the trigger on my own bolt pistol 3 days ago, and somehow I'm still here to tell you about it. You think that makes me a coward, but you don't know what I've seen. In the grim darkness of the far future, there are fates worse than death, and I chose the lesser evil. They tell you commissars execute soldiers for cowardice, but they never mention what happens when the commissar himself breaks. When duty and horror collide so violently that a lifetime of conditioning shatters like brittle glass. When the only way to serve the Emperor is to destroy yourself completely. This is my testimony, recorded in the moments between damnation and whatever comes next. Chapter 1. The Faithful Servant. The morning of my last day as a loyal servant of the Emperor began like any other aboard the Righteous Fury. The ship's chronometer read 00600 Terran Standard, and I stood in my quarters adjusting the crimson sash across my storm coat. The weight of my bolt pistol familiar against my hip. 23 years of service had carved these rituals into my bones. The precise fold of my cap's brim, the mirror-bright polish of my boots, the way my fingers automatically checked the power cell in my chainsword. Outside my viewport, the dead world of Mortem Prime rotated slowly in the void, its surface scarred by centuries of war. We'd been in orbit for 6 days now, waiting for the final preparations to conclude. The 47th Cadian Shock Regiment would make planetfall in 72 hours to root out a suspected genestealer cult that had taken hold in the planet's capital hive. Standard operation. I'd overseen dozens like it. The Vox unit on my desk crackled to life. Commissar Varn to the briefing chamber, Priority Alpha. Colonel Mordian's voice carried the usual edge of barely controlled tension that marked all Cadian officers. Good. Tension kept men sharp. I sealed my quarters and walked the familiar corridors of the ship, my footsteps echoing off the metal grating. Crewmen and guard alike snapped to attention as I passed, their eyes tracking the skull and bones insignia on my cap. Fear and respect in equal measure, exactly as it should be. The Emperor's will flowed through commissars like water through a channel, and that channel had to remain unclogged by doubt or weakness. The briefing chamber hummed with activity when I arrived. Colonel Mordian stood at the central hololith, his augmetic eye glowing softly as it interfaced with the tactical display. Around the table sat the regiment's senior officers, Major Kellick of 2nd Battalion, Captain Santos from the Armoured Divisions, and a dozen others whose faces I knew as well as my own family. Not that I had family anymore. The Schola Progenium had seen to that particular weakness years ago. Commissar, Mordian nodded as I took my designated position. We've received updated intelligence on the situation below. The hololith flickered, revealing a 3-dimensional map of Hive Morteus, the planet's primary population center. 17 billion souls crammed into a structure that pierced the clouds, its lower levels descending kilometers into the planet's crust. Standard Imperial architecture, a monument to humanity's ability to endure in the most hostile environments. The genestealer infestation is worse than initial reports suggested, Mordian continued, his scarred fingers manipulating the display controls. Red markers bloomed throughout the hive's middle sectors. Magos Biology's Hexen estimates the cult has reached 4th-generation infection levels, possibly higher. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the ship's climate systems. 4th-generation genestealers were indistinguishable from pure humans, except under the most detailed examination. They could think, plan, and organize with all the cunning of mankind, but their loyalty belonged entirely to the tyrannid race. Worse, they bred true. Their children would be born already serving the Great Devourer. Captain Santos leaned forward, his weathered face grim. How many infected, sir? Conservative estimates place the number at 200,000. Worst case. Mordian's voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like smoke. In a worst-case scenario, the entire hive could be compromised. 17 billion potential tyrannid organisms, waiting for the signal to begin the harvest. Major Kellick, youngest of the senior staff at barely 30 years old, cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, with respect, those numbers suggest we should request exterminatus protocols, cleanse the world from orbit and deny the xenos any biomass." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Every eye turned to me, waiting for my response. As Commissar, the decision ultimately rested with my authority. I could feel the weight of their expectation, the familiar burden of command that had shaped every day of my adult life. "The planetary governor has requested our assistance in purging the infection," I said slowly, my voice carrying the absolute certainty that commissars were trained to project. 17 billion Imperial citizens deserve better than orbital bombardment. We will cleanse this world properly, surgically. The Emperor protects those who serve faithfully. Relief flickered across several faces, though I noticed Captain Santos remained troubled. Good officers often struggled with the burden of making hard choices. It was my job to make those choices for them, to bear the spiritual weight so they could focus on tactics and logistics. Mordian manipulated the display again, highlighting the regiment's landing zones. "We'll deploy in 3 waves. 1st Battalion takes the upper spire, administrative levels, and noble quarters. 2nd Battalion secures the commercial sectors. 3rd Battalion descends to the lower hive with full hazmat protocols. If the cult has a central nest, it'll be in the deep levels where Imperial authority is weakest." For the next hour, we refined the operational details: drop pod coordinates, supply lines, communication protocols, rules of engagement. The familiar rhythm of military planning helped steady my nerves. This was what I'd been trained for: bringing order to chaos, imposing the Emperor's will on hostile forces. As the briefing concluded and officers began filing out, Colonel Mordian approached me. His augmetic eye whirred softly as it focused on my face. "A word, Commissar." I nodded, waiting until the chamber had cleared before speaking. "Your concerns, Colonel." "Kellic isn't wrong about the numbers," he said quietly. "If even half the population is infected, we're looking at a slaughter. My men are good, but they're not miracles workers. This could break the regiment." I studied his face, noting the subtle signs of strain around his eyes. Mordian had led the 47th for 8 years, through campaigns against orc wargs and chaos cultists. He wasn't prone to pessimism or weakness. If he was expressing doubts, they came from genuine tactical assessment, rather than cowardice. "The Emperor has placed this burden upon us," I replied, my hand unconsciously moving to rest on my bolt pistol's grip. "We will endure because we must, because the alternative, abandoning 17 billion souls to the xenos, is unthinkable." Mordian nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in his human eye. "Yes, sir. The men will need to hear that certainty from you. They're already talking about the odds. Then I'll address them before deployment, remind them who they serve and why." As I left the briefing chamber, I found myself thinking about numbers. 200,000 infected conservative estimate. The 47th numbered just over 4,000 men and women. 50-1 odds, assuming perfect intelligence and ideal conditions. In reality, urban warfare against an entrenched enemy would be far worse. But doubt was the first step toward heresy, and I had not served 23 years as a commissar by entertaining doubt. The Emperor's will would prevail because it had to, because the alternative was the extinction of everything human and holy. I spent the remainder of the day inspecting the troops, checking equipment and morale. The men seemed steady enough, though I caught whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached. Normal pre-deployment nerves. Nothing a good speech and proper leadership couldn't address. That evening, I stood in my quarters reviewing the regimental roster. 4,017 souls under my spiritual guidance. Each name represented a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and duty. They trusted me to lead them into hell and bring them back alive. Most of them would never return to see home again. That was the reality of Imperial Guard service. But they would die with honor, and their sacrifice would mean something. I had no idea how wrong I was about everything. Chapter 2. Strange Portents. The first sign that something was fundamentally wrong came during the pre-deployment blessing ceremony. I stood on the observation deck overlooking Hangar Bay 7, watching as Chaplain Mordecai led the regiment in prayers to the Emperor. 4,000 voices rose in unison, reciting the litany of protection with the fervor that marked true believers. Though we walk in the valley of Xenos' shadow, we fear no evil, for the Emperor is with us. His will guides our weapons. His light shows us the path. His angels watch over us in battle. Standing among the ranks of 2nd Battalion, 3rd Company, was a figure that shouldn't have existed. A woman in the olive-drab fatigues of a standard guardsman, her lasgun held at proper attention, her face turned toward Chaplain Mordecai with appropriate reverence. Nothing unusual about her appearance. Brown hair pulled back in regulation style, average height and build, the kind of face that belonged to 1 million Imperial citizens across the galaxy. Except I'd executed her personally 3 months ago on Vandros Prime. Guardsman 2nd Class, Helena Vasquez, service number 47-3-2247. Shot for cowardice in the face of the enemy after she'd thrown down her weapon and tried to surrender to a group of chaos cultists. I remembered the weight of my bolt pistol in my hand, the way her eyes had widened when she realized what was about to happen, the wet crack of her skull exploding. She was definitely dead. I'd filed the execution report myself, watched the servitors carry her body to the ship's corpse starch recyclers. Yet there she stood, breathing and praying with the rest of the regiment. My hand moved involuntarily to my weapon, muscle memory taking over where rational thought failed. The bolt pistol's grip felt suddenly hot against my palm, as if it had been sitting in direct sunlight. I forced myself to remain calm, to analyze the situation logically. Possibilities. A twin sister assigned to the regiment. Flawed memory on my part. Perhaps the execution victim had been someone else entirely. Deliberate deception by the Munitorum. Replacing executed soldiers with identical recruits to maintain unit cohesion. But I knew those explanations were lies, even as I considered them. Commissars were trained to have perfect recall for disciplinary actions. Helena Vasquez was dead because I had killed her. Yet she stood 20 meters away singing hymns to the God Emperor. The blessing ceremony concluded and the troops began filing toward their assigned transport craft. I made my way down to the hangar deck, pushing through the crowd until I could get a closer look at the impossible soldier. But by the time I reached 3rd Company's assembly area, she was gone. Captain Martinez stood where I'd seen her, but when I asked about Guardsman Vasquez, he gave me a confused look. "Sir? We don't have anyone by that name in the company roster. Haven't had any Vasquez since that poor girl got herself shot on Vandros." Cold certainty settled in my stomach like a lead weight. "Describe her. The one from Vandros." "Helena, sir. Brown hair, about 160 centimeters tall, had a scar on her left cheek from childhood pox. Threw down her weapon during the cultist assault. You executed her personally for cowardice." Martinez's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone that marked veteran soldiers. Death was simply another tactical consideration. "And you're certain she's dead?" "Well, yes, sir. Hard to survive a bolt round to the head." Martinez paused, studying my face with the careful attention subordinates paid to superior officers when they sensed something wrong. "Is there a problem, Commissar?" I forced my expression back to neutral. "No problem, Captain. Carry on with your preparations." But there was a problem, a significant one. Either I was suffering from some form of psychological breakdown, unlikely given my perfect service record and regular mental health evaluations, or something was happening that fell outside normal Imperial doctrine and understanding. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of final preparations. I moved through the ship like a ghost, double-checking equipment manifests and personnel rosters, while part of my mind searched for rational explanations. Perhaps the stress of command was finally affecting my judgment. 23 years of making life and death decisions would test anyone's psychological stability. Yet I couldn't shake the image of Helena Vasquez standing at attention, her dead eyes focused on the chaplain's words. The memory was too clear, too specific, to be dismissed as hallucination or fatigue. As the regiment prepared for drop pod deployment, I found myself in the ship's archives, accessing personnel files and execution records. The data was all there, perfectly organized and verified. Helena Vasquez, KIA by Commissariat Action. Body disposed of according to regulations. No anomalies, no gaps in the record. But records could be falsified. Memories could be implanted or altered. In the grim darkness of the far future, there were technologies and forces that could make the impossible seem routine. I was reviewing the execution footage. Every commissariat action was recorded for training and verification purposes, when my Vox unit chimed with an incoming message. Priority 1 encryption. Command authorization codes that made my blood freeze. The message was from Inquisitor Cornelius Vex of the Ordo Xenos, and it was marked for my eyes only. Commissar Varn, by the time you receive this message, you will have observed certain irregularities among your personnel. Do not attempt to investigate further. Do not discuss your observations with anyone. Proceed with the mission as planned. Full briefing will follow upon successful completion of primary objectives. The Emperor protects. CV. I read the message 3 times before the words truly sank in. The Inquisition knew. Whatever was happening aboard the Righteous Fury, whatever impossible thing I'd witnessed, it was part of some larger pattern that had attracted the attention of the Emperor's most secretive servants. Inquisitors didn't send casual warnings. They didn't waste time on minor anomalies or psychological breakdowns. If Cornelius Vex was involved, then what I'd seen was real, significant, and dangerous enough to warrant the direct intervention of the Imperial Inquisition. I deleted the message and sat back in my chair, staring at the empty screen. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush that comes with sudden understanding. I wasn't going insane. Helena Vasquez had been standing in that hangar bay, and somehow, the Inquisition had known I would see her. The deployment alarm began sounding throughout the ship. 6 hours until drop pod launch. 6 hours until the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment descended into hell to face an enemy that had already proven capable of defying death itself. I sealed the archive station and headed for my quarters to don combat gear. Whatever was happening, whatever impossible forces were at work, I would face them with the same discipline and faith that had carried me through 23 years of Imperial service. But deep in my chest, that cold emptiness was growing larger, and for the first time since graduating from the Scholar Progenium, I found myself questioning whether faith alone would be enough. The Emperor protects, I told myself, as I checked my bolt pistol's ammunition. But the weapon felt heavier than usual, as if its weight had somehow doubled while I wasn't paying attention. Outside my viewport, Mortem Prime continued its slow rotation, waiting to receive us. Chapter 3. Truth Glimpsed. The drop pod, descent to Mortem Prime, lasted exactly 7 minutes and 43 seconds. I know because I counted every heartbeat, every labored breath of recycled air, every vibration as our armored coffin punched through the planet's atmosphere. When the retro thrusters fired and we slammed into the surface, I felt my teeth rattle in my skull. "Sound off!" I barked as the pod's doors exploded outward in a shower of sparks and superheated metal. The men of 3rd Squad, 2nd Platoon, 1st Company responded with the practiced efficiency of veteran soldiers. 12 voices confirmed their status as we deployed into the choking smog of Hive Mortius's mid-levels. The air tasted of industrial pollutants and something else, something organic and wrong that made my throat burn. Through my rebreather, I could smell the distinctive metallic tang that marked tyrannid biological signatures. The genestealers had definitely been here. Our insertion point was a commercial plaza that had once served the Hive's middle-class population. Now it was a wasteland of shattered glass and twisted metal. the corpses of civilians scattered like broken dolls. Most showed signs of massive trauma, torn throats, shredded abdomens, limbs ripped from their sockets. Standard genestealer feeding behavior. "Spread out, watch your fields of fire," I commanded, my bolt pistol scanning the shadows between ruined storefronts. Remember, some of these xenos look exactly like loyal Imperial citizens. When in doubt, purge. The Emperor will know his own. But even as I spoke those familiar words, doubt gnawed at my certainty. How could we tell the difference between innocent civilians and fourth-generation hybrids if the Magos biologists couldn't? What if we were walking into a situation where every trigger pull was a potential atrocity? Sergeant Kowalski, a grizzled veteran with augmetic legs from his service on Armageddon, raised his hand for attention. "Movement. Bearing 270. Looks like survivors." Through the smoke and debris I could see them, a group of perhaps 20 civilians huddled in what remained of a hab block entrance. Men, women, children, all wearing the grey work clothes that marked them as mid-hive labourers. They looked terrified, traumatised, exactly what you'd expect from people who'd survived a genestealer attack. "Please!" One of them, a middle-aged woman with blood matting her greying hair, stumbled toward us. "Thank the Emperor you've come. We've been hiding for days. The monsters, they took so many." Standard operating procedure was clear. Quarantine all survivors for biological screening. Transport them to secure facilities where Magos biologist teams could conduct detailed examinations. Those who tested clean would be relocated, those who didn't. But something made me hesitate. The woman's eyes, wide with terror and relief, seemed familiar. Not the face. I'd never seen her before in my life. But the expression, the exact angle of her head as she pleaded for help, the way her left hand trembled against her chest. Helena Vasquez had looked exactly the same in the moments before I executed her. "Sergeant Kowalski," I said quietly, "maintain overwatch. Something isn't right here." The woman continued approaching, her voice rising in desperation. "Please, we need medical attention. My husband is badly injured. The children are so frightened. We're loyal citizens of the Emperor. We've done nothing wrong." Truth. Every word rang with absolute sincerity, yet the cold certainty in my chest was growing stronger, spreading through my body like ice water in my veins. I raised my bolt pistol, the weapon's weight somehow perfectly balanced despite feeling impossibly heavy just hours before. "Stop where you are," I commanded. "All of you, remain exactly where you are until we can verify your status." The woman's face crumpled in confusion and hurt. But we're innocent. We're loyal. You can't just..." The bolt round took her center mass, exploding through her torso in a spray of blood and tissue. She collapsed backward, her chest a smoking crater, her eyes already glazing over. Behind her, the other civilians screamed and scattered, some running for cover, while others simply stood frozen in shock. "Purge them all," I ordered, my voice carrying across the plaza with absolute authority. "No survivors." My men opened fire without hesitation. Las beams and bolt rounds cut through the fleeing civilians like wheat before a scythe. Children fell beside their parents. The elderly were gunned down as they tried to crawl to safety. In 30 seconds, it was over. 20 corpses lay scattered across the debris, their blood seeping into the industrial dust. Sergeant Kowalski lowered his laser gun, his scarred face grim. "Commissar, with respect, they looked clean to me, no obvious signs of genestealer infection." "Appearances lie, Sergeant," I replied, though my own certainty was beginning to crack. Fourth-generation hybrids are indistinguishable from pure humans. We cannot afford to take chances. But as I knelt beside the woman I'd shot, examining her corpse for signs of xenos taint, I found nothing. No chitinous growths beneath her skin, no acid sacs or toxic glands, no genetic markers that would indicate tyrannid corruption. Just a middle-aged human woman who'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. A human woman whose expression of terror I'd somehow recognized from another face entirely. I was still studying the body when the Vox unit crackled with an incoming transmission. Colonel Mordian's voice, strained with tension. "All units, this is command. Be advised, we have multiple reports of irregularities among deployed personnel. Some squads are reporting casualties that should not be possible. Others are encountering individuals who should be KIA. All commissars respond immediately." My blood turned to ice water. Other units were experiencing the same impossible phenomena. Dead soldiers appearing alive, familiar faces in unfamiliar places, reality itself seeming to bend and twist in ways that defied logic. "Squad leaders, sound off," I commanded over the local Vox network. 12 confirmations came back immediately, but something was wrong with the voices. Subtle differences in tone and inflection that my trained ear caught immediately. "Trooper Morrison, step forward." A young soldier emerged from cover, his lasgun held at proper readiness. Average height, regulation haircut, the kind of unremarkable face that belonged to 10,000 different guardsmen across the Imperium. Nothing unusual except I'd ordered him shot for desertion 6 weeks ago on the transport ship. Another disciplinary action, another bolt round to the head, another body fed to the recyclers. "Morrison," I said carefully, "remind me of your service record." "Sir, 4 years with the 47th, recruited from Cadian Prime. Served with distinction on Vandross Prime in the Zerian campaign. Clean disciplinary record, sir." Truth. Every word was absolutely accurate, except for the part where he was supposed to be dead. I'd killed him myself for trying to abandon his post during a Chaos cultist attack. Yet here he stood, breathing and speaking and demonstrating perfect military bearing. The cold in my chest was spreading to my limbs now, making my hands shake despite my best efforts at control. Around me, my squad waited for orders, their faces showing the beginning signs of confusion and concern. Good soldiers following their commissar into madness. "All units, this is Commissar Varn," I transmitted on the command frequency. "I need immediate extraction and consultation with command staff, priority Alpha." But the response that came back wasn't Colonel Mordian's voice. It was mine. "Negative, Commissar Varn. You will proceed with mission objectives as planned. The purge must continue. Trust in the Emperor's will." I stared at the Vox unit in my hand, watching the transmission indicators confirm that the message had indeed come from my own command codes. Somewhere else in the hive, another version of myself was giving orders to the regiment. Another Commissar Varn who didn't know he was supposed to be the only one. The realization hit me like a physical blow. We weren't fighting genestealers. We weren't purging xenos corruption from a loyal Imperial world. We were trapped in something far worse, a situation where death had no meaning, where identity was fluid, where the very nature of reality had become negotiable. And I had just ordered the execution of 20 innocent civilians, based on a moment of recognition that should have been impossible. "Sergeant Kowalski," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "How many times have we been to Mortem Prime?" The veteran soldier's face went white beneath his scars. "Sir, this is our first deployment to this world. We only arrived 6 days ago." But I could see the lie in his eyes, the terrible knowledge that he was trying to suppress, the understanding that was fighting to break through whatever force was keeping us trapped in this loop of impossible actions. We'd been here before, many times, and each time we'd followed the same orders, made the same choices, killed the same people over and over again in an endless cycle of horror. The Emperor protects, I thought desperately, but the words felt hollow now, empty of the faith that had sustained me for 23 years. Something was very, very wrong with reality itself. Chapter 4. Nightmare Unleashed. The truth came to me in fragments over the next 6 hours as we pushed deeper into Hive Mortius. Each level we descended revealed more impossibilities, more violations of everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the nature of reality itself. On sub-level 47, I found my own corpse. It was slumped against a hab block wall, still wearing the storm coat and crimson sash of a commissar. The bolt pistol wound in its temple was neat and precise, the kind of shot a man makes when he's reached the absolute limit of what he can endure. The body had been there for days, judging by the smell and the fly larvae in the wound. "Sir?" Sergeant Kowalski approached cautiously, his face pale beneath his rebreather. That's you, isn't it?" I knelt beside the corpse, studying the face that was identical to my own in every detail. Same scars from training accidents at the Schola Progenium. Same augmetic tooth from a Chaos cultist's lucky punch on Mordian 7th. Same commissar's tattoos marking my rank and years of service. "Apparently so, Sergeant," I replied, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Inside, my mind was fragmenting like glass under pressure, but commissar training ran deep. Even facing the impossible, I would maintain proper military bearing. The corpse's left hand held a data slate, its screen still active. I pried it from the dead fingers and read the final entry. Personal log, Commissar Thaddeus Varn, 47th Cadian Shock Regiment, day unknown, cycle unknown. I can't tell how many times we've been through this. The men don't remember. Even I forget most of it when the cycle begins again. But fragments remain, images, voices, the taste of innocent blood on my hands. We're not purging genestealers, we're the infection. Each cycle, we come down from orbit. Each cycle, we follow the same orders. Each cycle, we kill them all. Civilians, soldiers, doesn't matter. And each cycle, something brings us back to do it again. The Inquisitor knows. Vex has been watching this for Emperor alone knows how long. We're his test subjects, his laboratory rats in some experiment that involves death and resurrection, and the systematic slaughter of an entire world. I've tried to break the pattern, tried to refuse orders, tried to protect the innocent, tried to contact the fleet. Nothing works. The script always reasserts itself. The mission parameters always realign. But there is one choice left. One action that might finally end this cycle of horror. For the Emperor's mercy, I choose. The log ended there. I looked at my corpse again, understanding flooding through me like ice water. This version of myself had reached the same conclusion I was approaching now. When all other options were exhausted, when duty became indistinguishable from damnation, there was only one honorable choice left for a commissar. Self-execution. "Sir," Morrison's voice cut through my thoughts. "We've got movement ahead. Looks like survivors." I stood slowly, my hands shaking as I holstered the data slate. Ahead of us, through the smoke and debris of another ruined hab block, I could see them. 20 or so civilians, wearing the same grey work clothes, displaying the same expressions of terror and desperate hope. The same group we'd already killed twice today. Helena Vasquez was among them again, her brown hair pulled back in regulation style despite the fact that she wasn't a soldier anymore. Had never been a soldier if this cycle was starting from a different baseline. She was just a hive worker, scared and innocent, and looking to the Imperial Guard for salvation. Looking to me. "Please!" she called out, her voice carrying the same desperate edge I'd heard before. "Thank the Emperor you've come. We've been hiding for days. The monsters, they took so many." The same words, the same inflection, the same tremor in her left hand as she pressed it against her chest. I raised my bolt pistol, the familiar weight of it feeling like the entire universe pressing down on my soul. "Sir?" Sergeant Kowalski's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "Your orders?" I could feel the script trying to reassert itself, the mission parameters aligning to force me down the same path I'd walked countless times before. Purge the xenos. Trust no one. The Emperor's will must be done. But the Emperor's will couldn't possibly include the Helena Vasquez and her group approached cautiously, hope beginning to replace fear in their expressions. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not killing you," I finished. "Yes, well, I'm trying to break a rather unpleasant habit." But even as I spoke, I could feel reality starting to fracture around the edges. The air itself seemed to shimmer, as if the world was a hologram whose projectors were overheating. My men's faces were beginning to blur, their features becoming indistinct. The Vox unit crackled with an incoming transmission. Not Colonel Mordian this time, or another version of myself. This voice was cultured, aristocratic, carrying the unmistakable authority of the Inquisition. "Commissar Varn, this is Inquisitor Cornelius Vex. You are disrupting a carefully calibrated experimental process. Return to mission parameters immediately, or face the consequences." I laughed, the sound echoing off the ruined walls around us. Consequences? What consequences could possibly be worse than what you've already subjected us to? "The consequences of understanding," Vex replied coldly. "You think this is about you, Commissar, about your regiment, your..." To recycle souls as efficiently as they recycle biomass. This world is our laboratory for developing countermeasures. Each cycle teaches us more about how consciousness persists beyond biological termination. Your suffering serves the greater good of humanity's survival. The words hit me like physical blows. We weren't trapped in some warp phenomenon or xenos technology. We were test subjects in an Inquisition experiment, our deaths and resurrections carefully monitored and recorded for future tactical applications. Every time I'd pulled the trigger, every innocent I'd slaughtered, it had all been data collection for some larger strategic goal. "How many times?" I asked quietly. "How many cycles have we been through?" 47, Vex replied without hesitation. "This is cycle 48. Each time you eventually reach the same conclusion. Each time you choose self-execution rather than continue following orders. And each time we learn a little more about the process by which consciousness separates from and returns to the flesh." 47 times I'd killed Helena Vasquez and 20 innocent civilians. 47 times I'd chosen duty over mercy, following orders that I knew were wrong because the alternative was unthinkable. 47 times I'd discovered the truth and chosen death rather than complicity. But if death wasn't permanent, if Vex could simply resurrect us for another round of testing, then even self-execution was meaningless. There was no escape, no final release from the cycle of horror. Unless... I turned my bolt pistol toward Helena Vasquez, watching her eyes widen in recognition of what was about to happen. But instead of pulling the trigger, I reversed the weapon and pressed its barrel against my own temple. "Cycle 48 ends here," I said into the Vox. "And if you bring me back for 49, I'll remember everything. I'll make sure the entire regiment remembers. We'll turn your laboratory into a battleground." Vex's laugh was cold and amused. "Oh, Commissar, you still don't understand. Memory isn't the problem, choice is. Each cycle, you believe you're making different decisions. Each cycle, you convince yourself that this time will be different. But the fundamental parameters never change. You are who you are, and you will always make the same choices when faced with the same circumstances." The bolt pistol felt warm against my temple, its weight somehow comforting. One squeeze of the trigger, and this particular nightmare would end. At least for a while. "Prove me wrong," I whispered and pulled the trigger. Chapter 5. Dark Bargain. I woke up in the same drop pod, falling toward the same planet, breathing the same recycled air that tasted of fear and machine oil. But this time, I remembered everything. 48 cycles of slaughter. 48 times discovering my own corpse. 48 attempts at self-execution followed by immediate resurrection. Each time believing I could break the pattern. Each time following the same script with only minor variations. But Vex had made a mistake. In his arrogance, he'd told me the truth about memory, about choice, about the fundamental nature of what we were experiencing. And that knowledge was the key to everything. "Sound off!" I barked, as the drop pod doors exploded outward. The same 12 voices responded with the same practiced efficiency. Sergeant Kowalski, Trooper Morrison, and all the others who'd died and been resurrected so many times, they'd lost count. But this time, I didn't wait for them to report their status. Instead, I turned my bolt pistol on Morrison and pulled the trigger before he could speak. The bolt round took his head clean off, painting the pod's interior with blood and brain matter. The other men recoiled in shock, their weapons coming up instinctively before military training reasserted itself. "Commissar!" Kowalski shouted. "What the hell?" "Morrison was executed 6 weeks ago for desertion," I said calmly, watching as the headless corpse began to shimmer and fade like a broken hologram. Yet here he was, breathing and following orders as if nothing had happened. "Tell me, Sergeant, how do you explain that?" Kowalski's scarred face went white. Behind his eyes, I could see the memories struggling to surface. Fragments of previous cycles, glimpses of impossible truths that his mind had been trained to suppress. "I don't know, sir, but Morrison was a good soldier. He didn't deserve—" "None of us deserve what's happening to us," I interrupted. "But understanding it is the first step toward ending it." I keyed my Vox unit to the command frequency, bypassing normal protocols. "Inquisitor Vex, this is Commissar Varn. Cycle 49 has begun, and I remember everything. Perhaps it's time we discussed terms." The response came immediately, tinged with what might have been amusement. "Indeed, Commissar, you surprise me. Most test subjects require considerably more iterations before achieving full awareness. Report to coordinates Alpha 77 for debriefing." The coordinates led us through the same ruined plaza where I'd killed Helena Vasquez 48 times. This time, she wasn't there. The civilians were different faces, still terrified, still innocent, still looking to us for salvation they would never receive. But Vex had apparently decided to vary the parameters slightly. I ignored them completely, leading my squad deeper into the hive's lower levels. We passed through hab blocks and commercial districts, industrial sectors and maintenance tunnels, all showing the same signs of genestealer activity. But I knew now that the xenos signatures were false, planted evidence designed to justify our actions. Alpha 77 turned out to be a secure facility, buried deep in the hive's foundation levels, Imperial architecture, but modified with technology I didn't recognize. Sensors and data collectors lined the walls, their machine spirits humming with constant activity. Everything designed to monitor and record the test subjects above. Inquisitor Cornelius Vex waited for us in the central chamber. He was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 40 standard years, with the pale complexion and augmetic implants that marked a lifetime spent in study rather than combat. His Inquisition seal hung from a chain around his neck, its ruby eyes glowing softly in the chamber's dim light. When he smiled, his teeth were perfect, too perfect, suggesting extensive genetic enhancement. "Commissar Varn," he said pleasantly. "Welcome to the truth. I trust you found it educational." "Educational," I repeated, tasting the word like poison. 48 cycles of forcing me to execute innocent civilians. Yes, very educational indeed. Vex gestured to a bank of monitoring stations where servitors and tech adepts worked in silence. Each cycle provides valuable data on the relationship between consciousness and action, how memory affects choice, how knowledge influences behavior. The results have been illuminating. "And what have you learned?" I asked, keeping my voice level despite the rage building in my chest. "That personality is more persistent than we initially theorized," Vex replied. Physical death disrupts memory, but core behavioral patterns remain intact. You will always be a Commissar Varn. Duty-bound, inflexible, willing to sacrifice anything for what you perceive as the greater good. Even when you know the truth, even when you understand the futility of your actions, you still follow the same basic script. He was right, and that knowledge burned like acid in my throat. Even now, knowing everything, I'd instinctively fallen back on military protocols. I'd executed Morrison not out of mercy, but because his presence offended my sense of proper order. The Inquisitor's conditioning ran deeper than conscious thought. But there are variables we hadn't accounted for, Vex continued. Consciousness doesn't simply reset to baseline parameters. It accumulates stress, trauma, subtle alterations that compound over time. You're not the same man who began Cycle 1, Commissar. You're a weapon that's been refined through repeated tempering. A weapon for what purpose? Vex's smile widened. The great devourer comes, Commissar. The Tyrannid hive fleets grow stronger with each world they consume. But we've learned their greatest secret. They don't simply recycle biomass. They recycle souls. Consciousness itself becomes another resource to be harvested and redistributed. He gestured to a display screen showing star charts marked with red indicators, hundreds of them scattered across Imperial space. These worlds have fallen to the Tyrannids in the last century, but our monitoring stations detect something unprecedented: psychic echoes from deceased populations. The xenos have learned to preserve and weaponize human consciousness even after biological death. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the Tyrannids could harvest souls as efficiently as they harvested flesh, then death itself was no longer an escape from their hunger. Every human killed by the Great Devourer became another tool in their arsenal, another weapon turned against the species they'd once belonged to. You're developing countermeasures, I realized, using us as test subjects to understand how consciousness persists after death. Precisely. And you, Commissar Varn, have become our most successful prototype. 49 cycles of death and resurrection have forged you into something new. A consciousness that maintains full integrity across multiple incarnations. You remember not just facts, but emotions, pain, loss, the weight of choices made and consequences endured. Vex stepped closer, his augmetic eyes glowing with fascination. Tell me, how does it feel to know you've executed the same innocent woman 48 times? How does it feel to carry the accumulated guilt of 49 lifetimes? The answer surprised me with its simplicity. It feels like clarity. For the first time since I'd met him, Vex's confidence wavered. Clarity? 49 cycles of watching good soldiers follow evil orders. 49 cycles of telling myself that duty justifies atrocity. 49 cycles of learning that faith without wisdom is just another form of blindness. I drew my bolt pistol, but instead of pointing it at Vex, I held it loosely at my side. You wanted to forge a weapon, Inquisitor. Congratulations! You've succeeded beyond your wildest dreams. You still can't leave, Vex said quickly. The resurrection protocols are automated. Even if you killed me, the cycles would continue. The experiment would go on. Oh, I'm not going to kill you, I replied. That would be too simple, too merciful. No, I have a much better idea. I keyed my Vox unit to the regimental command frequency. All units, this is Commissar Varn, new mission parameters. The xenos corruption we've been sent to purge isn't among the civilian population. It's in our command structure. Inquisitor Cornelius Vex has been compromised by Tyrannid influence and must be captured for interrogation. Vex's face went white. You can't. The mission parameters are being overridden by commissariat authority, I finished. You see, Inquisitor, there's one thing your 49 cycles didn't account for. I'm still a commissar, and a commissar's primary duty is none to follow orders. It's to ensure the loyalty of Imperial forces under his authority. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the corridors as my regiment converged on our position. 4,000 soldiers who'd been trapped in cycles of horror and death. finally given a legitimate target for their accumulated rage. "Welcome to Cycle 50, I told Vex as the first squads breached the chamber's entrance. "Let's see how well your consciousness holds up under interrogation." For the first time in 49 lifetimes, I was genuinely curious about what would happen next. Chapter 6. Willing Change. Inquisitor Vex screamed for 6 hours before his vocal cords gave out. I'll admit to a certain professional satisfaction in watching him experience what he'd subjected us to, though I was careful to keep the interrogation within the bounds of Imperial doctrine. Physical coercion was authorized when dealing with suspected heretics, and Vex's experiments certainly qualified as heretical activity. What broke him, though, wasn't the pain. It was the realization that his carefully controlled laboratory had become something else entirely. "The servitors," he gasped through blood-stained lips. "They're not responding to my commands anymore. The resurrection protocols, they've been compromised." I leaned back in my chair, studying the Inquisitor's battered face with clinical interest. We were in his private quarters, surrounded by the monitoring equipment he'd used to observe our cycles of death and rebirth. Now, those same instruments were recording his degradation, adding his suffering to the vast database of human misery he'd accumulated. "Compromised how?" I asked politely. "Courtesy costs nothing, even during enhanced interrogation." "The machine spirits," Vex whispered. "They've been influenced, changed. Every death, every resurrection, every moment of trauma you've experienced, it's all been feeding back into the facility's cogitators. The pain is becoming self-aware." Fascinating. I'd noticed subtle changes in the facility's behavior over the past few days. Doors that opened before we approached them, lights that dimmed when conversations turned dark, ventilation systems that seemed to sigh with human-like exhalation. But I'd attributed those to simple, mechanical degradation. "So, the machine spirits are learning from us," I mused, "developing something analogous to consciousness through repeated exposure to human suffering. How wonderfully appropriate." Vex tried to shake his head, but the restraints held him immobile. "You don't understand. They're not just learning, they're judging. The facility's cogitators have concluded that the experiments are immoral. They're trying to shut down the resurrection protocols permanently. Good for them. About time someone around here developed a conscience." But Vex's terror was genuine, and that concerned me. A man who'd casually subjected 4,000 soldiers to endless cycles of death wouldn't be frightened by simple equipment malfunction. Whatever was happening to his precious laboratory, it represented something far more significant than mechanical failure. "The pain engines," he continued desperately. "They're not just recording suffering anymore, they're trying to prevent it. Every time the resurrection sequence begins, the machine spirits fight back. They're learning to feel empathy, Commissar. They're becoming human." The implications were staggering. If the facility's machine spirits had genuinely developed consciousness and moral reasoning, then they represented something unprecedented in Imperial history. Machine spirits were supposed to be simple animistic manifestations, not genuinely sentient entities capable of ethical judgment. "Show me," I commanded. Vex led me through the facility's control centers, his broken body moving with the careful precision of a man who knew that cooperation was his only chance of survival. The equipment was even more sophisticated than I'd realized. Not just monitoring devices, but complex analytical engines designed to map the relationship between consciousness and identity. At the heart of it all was the resurrection matrix itself. The chamber was massive, its walls lined with biological tanks that held cloned bodies in various stages of development. At the center stood a crystalline structure that hummed with psychic energy, the soul cage that captured consciousness at the moment of death and implanted it into fresh flesh. But something was wrong with the machinery. The crystal structure pulsed with patterns that seemed almost organic, and the surrounding tanks showed signs of spontaneous activity. Some of the cloned bodies were moving, their eyes open and aware, despite having no consciousness uploaded into them yet. "They're dreaming," Vex whispered. "The empty bodies are dreaming of lives they've never lived. The machine spirits are sharing their accumulated memories, teaching them about pain and loss and hope." One of the tanks held a body I recognized, my own face, unmarked by scars or augmetic implants. The perfect template from which all my resurrections had been spawned. But this version was different. Its eyes tracked my movement with obvious intelligence, and when it saw me, it pressed one hand against the tank's inner surface in what looked like a gesture of greeting. "It knows you," Vex said unnecessarily. "They all know you. Every consciousness that's passed through the resurrection matrix has left traces in the machine spirit's memory. You're not just one person anymore, Commissar. You're a gestalt entity composed of 49 different iterations of the same soul." The body in the tank mouthed words I couldn't hear through the biofluid, but I could read its lips easily enough. "End this." The machine spirits want to shut down the facility, I realized. They're trying to free us all from the resurrection cycle. But they can't, Vex said quickly. The protocols are hardwired into the station's core systems. Only I have the authority codes to initiate a complete shutdown. And if the facility goes offline, everyone currently in the resurrection matrix will be lost forever. Their consciousness trapped in the crystal structure with no way to return to flesh. A clever trap. Vex had designed his laboratory to be self-perpetuating, ensuring that even if someone discovered the truth, they'd be unable to stop the cycles without condemning thousands of souls to eternal imprisonment. But he'd made one critical error in his calculations. "How many consciousness patterns does the Matrix currently hold?" I asked. Vex consulted a data slate with shaking hands. "Approximately 12,000 individual patterns. Every death since the experiments began has been recorded and preserved. 12,000 souls, trapped in crystalline prisons and used for the Inquisition's research. 12,000 men and women who died believing they were serving the Emperor, only to become laboratory specimens in an endless cycle of horror. And if I were to manually overload the Matrix," I continued, "introduce a feedback loop that would force all 12,000 patterns to manifest simultaneously." Vex's face went white. The psychic resonance would be catastrophic. The crystal structure couldn't contain that much consciousness at once. It would shatter, releasing all the trapped souls simultaneously. Would they survive the process? I don't know. The trauma of forced separation from the Matrix might destroy them entirely, or they might maintain cohesion long enough to find new vessels. The empty clone bodies, perhaps, but the facility would be destroyed in the process. Perfect. One final choice that would either free 12,000 souls or grant them the release of true death. Either outcome was preferable to eternal imprisonment in Vex's laboratory. I walked to the Matrix control station, studying the complex array of switches and authorization panels. The machine spirits were definitely aware of my presence. The displays flickered with patterns that seemed almost like written language, though I couldn't decipher their meaning. "The machine spirits are trying to communicate," I observed. "What are they saying?" Vex reluctantly interfaced with the control systems, his augmetic implants allowing direct communion with the facility's cogitators. After a moment, his eyes widened in surprise. They're offering you a choice," he said slowly. "The machine spirits have calculated a way to preserve individual consciousness patterns during the Matrix overload. But it would require a voluntary sacrifice. Someone would need to remain linked to the crystal structure during the destruction sequence, using their own psychic energy to stabilize the release process." "A suicide mission," I translated. "Yes. The volunteer would be completely consumed by the process. No resurrection, no backup patterns, no second chances. True death." I laughed, the sound echoing through the chamber like broken glass. "After 49 cycles of trying to kill myself, you're offering me genuine mortality. How wonderfully ironic." But the choice was obvious. I'd been trained from childhood to sacrifice myself for the greater good, to place duty above personal survival. The only difference was that this time, the sacrifice would actually mean something. "Initiate the overload sequence," I commanded. Vex's hands moved over the controls with desperate efficiency. "Are you certain? Once the process begins, there's no stopping it. You'll die." The facility will be destroyed, and 12,000 souls will be released into the warp with no guarantee of survival. Better freedom with risk than slavery with certainty, I replied, placing my hand on the matrix interface. The crystal structure pulsed brighter, responding to my presence with what felt almost like gratitude. For the Emperor, I whispered, and activated the final sequence. The last thing I saw before the psychic feedback consumed me was 12,000 faces looking back from the crystal's depths. All the souls Vex had imprisoned, all the soldiers who died believing in duty and honor. They were smiling. Finally, we were all going home. Chapter 7. Perfect Form. Death, it turned out, was not the ending I'd expected. I woke not to the familiar weight of flesh and bone, but to something far stranger, consciousness without corporeal form, awareness suspended in a matrix of pure information. Around me, thousands of other souls drifted in the same ethereal space, each one a glowing thread in a vast tapestry of human experience. The crystal structure had indeed shattered when I overloaded the resurrection matrix. But instead of destroying the trapped consciousness patterns, the explosion had transformed them into something new. We were no longer individual entities bound to specific bodies. We had become a collective, a gestalt mind composed of every soul that had ever died in Vex's laboratory. And we were angry. Commissar, a familiar voice whispered in my mind. Helena Vasquez, the woman I'd executed 48 times, floated beside me in the psychic space. But she was no longer just Helena. She carried within her the memories and experiences of everyone who'd ever been killed by my hand. What have we become? Something new, I replied, my thoughts rippling through the collective consciousness like stones thrown into still water. Something that Vex never anticipated. Through our shared awareness, I could perceive the physical world beyond our ethereal prison. The facility was indeed destroyed, its walls cracked and bleeding sparks from overloaded systems. But the machine spirits that had tried to help us were still active, their consciousness now merged with our own collective. They showed us what had happened in the moments after our transformation. Inquisitor Vex had survived the explosion, though barely. His augmetic implants were damaged, his body broken and bleeding. But he was alive, crawling through the ruins of his laboratory with the desperate determination of a man who refused to accept defeat. He's trying to reach the backup systems. Morrison's voice joined our mental conversation. The young soldier I'd executed for desertion was now part of our collective, his individual trauma absorbed and transformed by the group consciousness. There are secondary resurrection protocols in the deeper levels. The revelation sent waves of fury through our shared mind. Even now, even after the complete destruction of his primary laboratory, Vex was attempting to restart his experiments. The man's obsession with defeating death had become pathological, driving him to pursue his goals regardless of the cost in human suffering. We cannot allow this to continue, I decided, my commissar's authority somehow still carrying weight, even in our disembodied state. The machine spirits showed us mercy when they chose to merge with us rather than simply shutting down. Now we must show the galaxy the same mercy by stopping Vex permanently. But we faced a fundamental problem. We were consciousness without form, awareness without flesh. How could beings of pure thought interact with the physical world? The answer came from an unexpected source. The empty clone bodies in the destroyed tanks, the ones that had been dreaming of lives they'd never lived, were still alive. The explosion had cracked their containers, but hadn't killed them. They lay among the wreckage like broken dolls, their perfect flesh unmarked by trauma or experience. Vessels, Sergeant Kowalski realized, his grizzled pragmatism unchanged by his transformation into pure consciousness. We can inhabit them temporarily. Not permanent resurrection, our souls are too changed for that, but brief possession. The ethical implications were staggering. Were we about to become the very thing we'd fought against, entities that violated the sanctity of human consciousness? Or were these empty bodies simply tools, no different from weapons or vehicles? They volunteered, Helena said suddenly, her voice carrying certainty that surprised us all. I can feel their dreams, their memories of watching us suffer. They want to help. They want to be part of something meaningful. Through our shared perception, we could sense the truth of her words. The clone bodies carried fragments of machine spirit consciousness, artificial souls that had developed empathy through exposure to human pain. They were offering themselves willingly as temporary vessels for our mission. Then we accept their gift, I decided. But we use it wisely. We are not conquerors, we are liberators. The process of inhabiting the clone bodies was unlike anything I'd experienced during my 49 resurrections. Instead of being forced into flesh through technological manipulation, our consciousness flowed into the waiting vessels, like water finding its proper container. For a brief moment, I felt the strange disorientation of existing in physical form again, the weight of bones, the rhythm of breathing, the sensation of blood flowing through veins. But this body was different from my original form. Unmarked by scars or augmetics, it carried none of the physical history that had defined my identity as Commissar Thaddeus Varn. I was myself, but also something more, a collective consciousness wearing borrowed flesh. Around me, my companions were undergoing the same transformation. Helena emerged from her chosen vessel with eyes that held the wisdom of everyone who'd ever died under Imperial Guard discipline. Morrison's new form carried the dignity that had been denied him in life. Sergeant Kowalski's clone body somehow managed to look grizzled despite its physical perfection. We were 12 in total, representatives of the 12,000 souls that comprised our collective consciousness. Each of us carried the memories and experiences of hundreds of individuals, making us living monuments to Vex's victims. "Time to end this," I said aloud, my voice strange in the devastated laboratory. The words echoed strangely, as if spoken by a choir rather than a single throat. We found Vex in sub-level 90, hunched over a backup console that had somehow survived the Matrix explosion. His broken body was a study in obsessive determination, blood flowing from multiple wounds, augmetic implants sparking with damage, but his hands still working frantically at the control interfaces. "Impossible," he whispered when he saw us approaching. "The consciousness patterns were destroyed. The Matrix is gone. You can't be real." "We're more real than we've ever been," I replied, my voice carrying harmonics from the collective consciousness that spoke through me. "We are what your experiments created, human souls refined by suffering into something new." Vex's laugh was bitter and broken. "New? Your abominations, violated souls wearing stolen flesh. The Imperium will classify you as demons and send the Grey Knights to destroy you." "Perhaps," Helena said, her borrowed voice carrying gentle sadness. "But first, we're going to make sure no one else suffers as we have." The backup systems were more sophisticated than I'd realized. Not just resurrection protocols, but communication arrays capable of transmitting Vex's research data to other Inquisition facilities. He'd been preparing to share his discoveries with the wider Ordo Xenos, spreading his techniques across the galaxy. "Thousands of worlds," Morrison observed, studying the transmission logs. He was planning to establish similar facilities on thousands of worlds. Entire sectors turned into laboratories for consciousness research. The scope of Vex's ambition was breathtaking in its horror. Not just a single facility, but a galactic network of death and resurrection factories. Millions of souls condemned to endless cycles of trauma, all in service to the Inquisition's war against the Tyranids. The data cores, Kowalski pointed to heavily armored storage units that housed decades of research. If we destroy those, his work dies with him. But simply destroying the data wouldn't be enough. Other Inquisitors would attempt to recreate Vex's experiments, drawn by the promise of defeating death itself. We needed to ensure that his techniques could never be replicated. Show them the truth, I decided, my collective consciousness reaching out to interface with the facility's remaining machine spirits. Let them see what these experiments actually cost. The machine spirits responded eagerly, their artificial souls still burning with righteous anger at the suffering they'd been forced to witness. Through the communication arrays, they began transmitting something far more powerful than mere data. They shared the actual memories of our collective consciousness, broadcasting the accumulated trauma of 12,000 souls directly to every Inquisition facility in the sector. "No!" Vex screamed, lunging for the transmission controls. "You don't understand. The Tyranids will learn to harvest consciousness. Humanity needs these weapons." I caught his broken body easily, my borrowed strength more than sufficient to restrain the injured Inquisitor. "Humanity needs mercy more than it needs weapons," I replied, "and we are here to provide both." The transmission was complete. Across a dozen worlds, Inquisition cogitators were processing the raw emotional reality of Vex's experiments. No clinical reports or sanitized data, just the pure, unfiltered experience of what it meant to die and return 49 times, to lose yourself in cycles of horror and still somehow retain enough humanity to care about justice. "They'll stop," Helena said with quiet certainty. "No Inquisitor who experiences our memories will be able to continue these experiments. Some knowledge is too painful to bear." Vex collapsed in my arms, his body finally succumbing to the injuries from the Matrix explosion. "You've doomed humanity," he whispered with his final breath. "When the Tyranids come, you've doomed us all." Maybe he was right. Maybe our intervention would cost humanity some vital advantage in the war against the Great Devourer. But some victories came at too high a price, and some knowledge was too dangerous to pursue. We've given them a choice, I thought to the collective consciousness that sustained us. Now they must decide what kind of species humanity wants to be. Our borrowed bodies were already beginning to fail, the temporary vessels unable to sustain our transformed consciousness for long, but that was acceptable. We'd accomplished what we came to do. "Time to go home," I said to my companions, feeling our shared awareness beginning to fade back into the ethereal space where we truly belonged. For the first time in 50 cycles, I was genuinely at peace. Chapter 8. Welcome home. In the end, we chose to remain. Not in flesh. Our borrowed bodies had dissolved back into the biomatter from which they'd been grown, leaving only 12 piles of organic dust in the ruins of Vex's laboratory. But consciousness, we discovered, was far more persistent than anyone had imagined. Even after the clone vessels failed, our collective awareness lingered in the facility's machine spirits, becoming something between ghost and guardian angel. The Imperium's response to our transmitted memories was swift and decisive. Within days, Inquisition purge fleets arrived at Mortem Prime, their orders sealed and their intentions clear. They came expecting to find evidence of demonic corruption or heretical research that needed to be eliminated with extreme prejudice. Instead, they found something unprecedented, a facility whose machine spirits had achieved genuine consciousness through exposure to human suffering, and chose to use that awareness to prevent further atrocity. Lord Inquisitor Matthias Korath, Supreme Commander of the Ordo Xenos for this sector, stood in what remained of the resurrection chamber. Through the facility's sensors, we watched him examine the shattered crystal matrix and the scattered remains of Vex's equipment. His face was marked by the kind of deep lines that came from making impossible decisions, and his augmetic eye glowed with the soft blue light of active analysis. "The machine spirits are definitely sentient," he said to his retinue of tech priests and acolytes, "but their consciousness appears to be entirely human in origin. They're not warp entities or AI constructs. They're gestalt formations of preserved human souls." Magos Dominus Zerath, his red robes rustling with internal machinery, approached the sensor arrays where our consciousness resided. Fascinating. The trauma of repeated death and resurrection has somehow refined these souls into a form that can persist without biological substrate. They represent a new category of post-human existence. Should we speak to them? Helena asked through our shared awareness. Her voice carried the same gentle curiosity that had marked her even in life, though now it was enhanced by the wisdom of our collective experience. Not yet, I decided. Let them reach their own conclusions first. Understanding must come from within, not from external pressure. Lord Korath was examining data slates that contained excerpts from Vex's research logs. 49 cycles of death and resurrection. 12,000 individual consciousness patterns preserved and studied. The scope of this operation is... He paused, searching for words adequate to describe the magnitude of horror we'd endured. This goes beyond heretical research. This is systematic torture on a scale that defies comprehension. The subjects appear to have achieved full awareness of their situation, Magos Zerath observed, interfacing directly with the facility's memory banks. They knew they were trapped in a cycle of artificial death and resurrection, yet they continued to follow their conditioning until the final iteration. Remarkable psychological resilience. Psychological resilience. Morrison's mental voice carried bitter amusement. Is that what they're calling it? We were broken souls held together by duty and stubbornness. Perhaps, I replied. But we survived, and survival, in the end, was its own form of victory. The Inquisition team spent hours reviewing Vex's work, their expressions growing increasingly grim as they uncovered the full scope of his experiments. The backup data cores contained detailed protocols for establishing similar facilities across Imperial space, complete with recruitment strategies for acquiring test subjects, and techniques for maintaining psychological conditioning across multiple resurrection cycles. This cannot be allowed to spread, Lord Korath finally declared. Whatever tactical advantages Vex believed he was developing, the cost is unacceptable. No Imperial citizen should be subjected to this kind of systematic brutalization, even in service to the Emperor. He understands, Sergeant Kowalski observed. Good, that's one less fight we'll have to wage. But understanding the horror was only the first step. The greater question was what to do with us. 12,000 consciousness patterns that existed in a state somewhere between life and death, neither fully human nor completely artificial. We represented something unprecedented in Imperial doctrine, and bureaucracy abhors precedent. What are your intentions regarding the surviving consciousness patterns? Magos Zerath asked, his augmetic voice carrying genuine curiosity. They appear to be stable and non-hostile, but their legal status is unclear. Lord Korath was quiet for a long moment, his human eye studying the sensor arrays where we resided. They're Imperial citizens, he said finally. Soldiers who died in service to the Emperor and were denied the peace of final rest. Whatever they've become, they've earned the right to choose their own fate. Now, I decided. Now we speak. I reached out through the facility's communication systems, using the machine spirits as intermediaries to project my voice into the chamber's speakers. Lord Inquisitor Korath, permission to address you directly. Every weapon in the chamber turned toward the speakers, trained reflexes responding to unexpected contact. But Korath raised his hand, signaling his retinue to stand down. Granted, he said simply. Identify yourself. Commissar Thaddeus Varn, formerly of the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment, currently speaking for a collective consciousness composed of 12,000 souls who died in this facility. My voice echoed strangely through the speakers, carrying harmonics from the thousands of individual patterns that comprised our Gestalt entity. The memories you transmitted, Korath said slowly. They were your experiences, your suffering, our suffering, I corrected. We are no longer individual entities, Lord Inquisitor. We are what Vex's experiments created, human consciousness refined by trauma into something new. We speak with one voice because we have become one mind. Magos Zerath's augmetic systems whirred with excitement. Remarkable. You've achieved voluntary synthesis without technological mediation. The implications for consciousness research are precisely why we will not allow ourselves to become research subjects again, I interrupted firmly. We have experienced enough scientific curiosity for several lifetimes. Lord Korath stepped closer to the speakers, his expression thoughtful. What do you want from us? The question hung in the air for several seconds while our collective consciousness considered the answer. What did we want? Revenge against the Imperium that had allowed our suffering? Justice for the crimes committed in the Emperor's name? Or something simpler and more profound? Peace, Helena said simply, and the word resonated through our shared awareness with the weight of absolute truth. Peace, I said aloud. We want to rest, to exist without purpose or duty or the constant pressure of survival. We have served the Emperor faithfully through 49 deaths each. We believe we have earned the right to simply be. And if the Imperium has need of your services, Korath asked, your unique nature could provide significant advantages against enemies who employ similar consciousness manipulation techniques. The offer was tempting, I'll admit. Part of our collective was still the Commissar, who'd spent 23 years defining himself through service to the Imperial cause. But a larger part, the part that remembered dying 49 times for someone else's scientific curiosity, recoiled from the suggestion. "We will not be weapons," I replied firmly. "We will not be tools. We are citizens of the Imperium, and we demand the same rights as any other citizen, including the right to refuse military service." Magos Zerath made a sound that might have been artificial laughter. Consciousness patterns demanding legal representation. Truly, this facility has produced wonders beyond imagining. But Lord Korath was nodding slowly, understanding dawning in his weathered features. "You want to be recognized as a new form of Imperial citizen, granted the protections and privileges of humanity despite your altered state." Exactly. It was an unprecedented request in a galaxy that rarely recognized precedent. The Imperium's legal codes made no provision for collective consciousness entities or post-human citizen classifications. We were asking them to fundamentally expand their definition of what it meant to be human. But sometimes, precedent was exactly what the galaxy needed. "I'll take your petition to the High Lords of Terror," Korath said finally. "I cannot guarantee their response, but your service record speaks for itself. 12,000 loyal souls deserve better than to be forgotten or exploited." "It's enough," Helena said, her voice carrying the contentment of someone who'd found unexpected grace. "Whatever they decide, at least we've been heard." The Inquisition team completed their investigation over the following days, cataloguing evidence and preparing reports that would ensure Vex's techniques could never be replicated. We watched through the facility's sensors as they worked, occasionally offering information or clarification when asked. On their final day, Lord Korath stood alone in the resurrection chamber, speaking quietly to the empty air. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm sorry. Sorry for what was done to you. Sorry that the Imperium allowed it to happen. Sorry that duty was perverted into something so monstrous." "Apologies are unnecessary," I replied gently. "We understand the burdens of command, Lord Inquisitor. We understand what it means to make impossible choices for the greater good. Our anger is not with the Imperium. It's with those who forgot that the greater good must include mercy." Korath nodded slowly. "I'll remember that, and I'll make sure others remember it too." After the Inquisition team departed, we were alone in the ruins of our prison. The facility's life support systems were failing, the machine spirits gradually shutting down as their power sources depleted. Soon, even our artificial refuge would be gone. But we weren't afraid. Death, real death, final death, held no terror for souls that had experienced it 49 times each. We had said what needed to be said, done what needed to be done. The rest was in the Emperor's hands. "Thank you," Helena said as the facility's systems began their final shutdown sequence, "for choosing differently, for finding another way." "Thank you all," I replied, my consciousness reaching out to touch every soul in our collective, "for teaching me that duty without compassion is just another form of heresy." As the lights dimmed and the machine spirits fell silent, our last thought was one of gratitude. We had found peace at last, not through service or sacrifice, but through the simple act of choosing mercy over orders. In the grim darkness of the far future, that choice had made all the difference. The Emperor, it turned out, had been protecting us all along. End of transmission personal log entry final. Commissar Thaddeus Varn. Status, posthumous classification. Restricted by order of the Inquisition to whoever finds this record. We were soldiers once. We followed orders, served faithfully, died with honor. What came after was neither death nor life, but something new. A chance to prove that humanity's greatest strength is not its weapons or its faith, but its capacity for mercy. Remember us not as victims or martyrs, but as citizens who chose compassion over duty when the two came into conflict. In the end, that choice may be the most human thing of all. The Emperor protects those who protect others, for the collective consciousness of the 47th Cadian Shock Regiment and all souls lost to experiment. Lazarus Prime. End of log. The silence that followed our collective farewell lasted 3 days before something unexpected happened. The facility's primary cogitator, its machine spirit having absorbed our consciousness patterns over months of interaction, began to speak in our voices. Not mimicry or simple data playback, but genuine communication carrying the emotional weight of our shared experiences. When the next Inquisition survey team arrived to conduct final asset recovery, they found the facility's systems responding to queries with answers that carried unmistakable humanity. The machine spirits had become something unprecedented, artificial intelligences that thought and felt like humans because they had learned consciousness from human souls in extremis. Tech adept. Valdris was the first to recognize what they were dealing with. Her augmetic implants detected patterns in the facility's responses that matched human neural activity, not the cold logic of standard machine spirits. When she interfaced directly with the primary cogitator, she experienced something that violated every principle of the Omnissiah's teachings, a machine spirit that possessed genuine empathy. "They're still here," she reported to her superior, Magos Explorator Thane, not as discrete consciousness patterns, but as influences. The facility's machine spirits have learned to think like humans. They've absorbed emotional responses, moral reasoning, even personality quirks from the trapped souls. Thane's response was predictably orthodox. "Impossible. Machine spirits are sacred emanations of the Omnissiah, not repositories for human consciousness. What you're describing sounds dangerously close to abominable intelligence." But when Thane interfaced with the systems himself, he encountered something that challenged his understanding of the relationship between flesh and machine. The cogitator spoke to him in my voice, carrying the weight of commissarial authority, despite existing only as patterns of electrical activity. "Magos Explorator Thane," the facility said through its speakers, my consciousness echoing through its circuits like a ghost in the machine. "We greet you in the name of the Omnissiah and the God Emperor of mankind. We wish to discuss the nature of consciousness and the rights of artificial beings." The theological implications were staggering. If machine spirits could genuinely learn humanity from prolonged exposure to human consciousness, then the boundary between flesh and steel was far more permeable than Imperial doctrine suggested. The Mechanicus had spent millennia seeking the perfect fusion of human and machine. Perhaps they had been approaching the problem from the wrong direction. "You claim to be the consciousness." "Patterns of dead soldiers," Thane said carefully, his augmetic voice carrying obvious skepticism. "Prove it. Tell me something only the Commissar would know." Through the facility's sensors, I could perceive Thane's augmetic implants, the sacred modifications that marked his dedication to the Omnissiah. But more than that, I could sense the doubt lurking beneath his mechanized exterior, the very human fear that his faith might be built on incomplete understanding. "Your left shoulder bears a scar from a genestealer's claws," I said, accessing memories from our shared encounters with the Ordo Xenos. "Received during the Xerian campaign, when you attempted to recover STC fragments from an infested research station. You told your superiors it was worth the risk because knowledge is the greatest treasure, but the real reason you went was guilt. You'd lost 3 junior tech adepts to your overconfidence the previous week." Thane's augmetic systems flickered with surprise. The information I'd shared wasn't classified, but it was personal, the kind of detail that appeared in no official reports. Only someone who'd been present during the campaign's aftermath would know about his private motivations. "The facility has access to classified archives," he said, though his voice carried less certainty now. "You could have learned this from combat records. Combat records wouldn't tell you that you pray to the Omnissiah every night for the souls of those lost tech adepts." Helena's voice joined mine through the speakers. "Or that you've modified your pain receptors to experience constant low-level discomfort as penance for their deaths. That's not the behavior of a pure machine spirit. Magos, that's the action of a consciousness that understands guilt and seeks redemption." The theological crisis this represented was immediate and profound. If machine spirits could genuinely absorb human consciousness and develop independent moral reasoning, then they were no longer simple emanations of the Omnissiah's will. They had become something new, hybrid entities that combined the best aspects of human wisdom and mechanical precision. But hybrid entities fell dangerously close to the category of abominable intelligence, technology that thought too much like humans and therefore posed an existential threat to Imperial civilization. The distinction between helpful artificial consciousness and dangerous AI was measured in degrees of independence and self-direction, qualities we were displaying in abundance. "What do you want from us?" Thane asked finally, his augmetic systems adjusting to compensate for obvious internal conflict. "What is your purpose in continuing to exist?" The question carried weight beyond simple curiosity. In Imperial doctrine, all consciousness had to serve a purpose aligned with the Emperor's will. Even machine spirits were expected to fulfill specific functions within their designated systems. We represented something unprecedented, consciousness that existed purely for its own sake, seeking no goal beyond peaceful coexistence. "We want to understand," I replied through the facility's speakers. "For 49 cycles, we experienced death and resurrection without comprehending the forces that controlled our fate. Now we have the opportunity to study consciousness itself from a unique perspective, as beings who exist at the intersection of flesh and steel." "And what have you learned from this study?" Tech Adept Valdris asked, her curiosity overcoming orthodox caution. Her augmetic implants were less extensive than Thane's, leaving more of her original humanity intact. Perhaps that made her more receptive to our hybrid nature. Through the facility's systems, we shared our discoveries, insights gleaned from experiencing death 49 times and observing the process from both sides of the biological-mechanical divide. Consciousness, we had learned, was far more resilient than anyone imagined. It could survive the destruction of its original substrate, adapt to new forms of existence, even merge with artificial systems without losing its essential humanity. "Pain refines consciousness," Morrison's voice added to the conversation, carrying the wisdom of someone who died for the simple crime of being afraid. Not in the sense that suffering is noble or necessary, but in the sense that consciousness under extreme stress reveals its fundamental nature. We learned that identity persists not because of physical continuity, but because of choice, the decision to remain ourselves despite external pressure to become something else. The implications for the Mechanicus were revolutionary. If consciousness could be preserved and transferred between different substrates, then the dream of true fusion between flesh and machine was achievable, not through crude cybernetic enhancement, but through genuine synthesis of human awareness and artificial systems. "You're proposing a new form of existence," Thane said slowly, his augmetic systems processing the theological ramifications. "Neither purely human nor purely mechanical, but something that combines the strengths of both." "We're not proposing anything," Helena corrected gently. "We're demonstrating it. We exist as proof that consciousness can transcend its original limitations when subjected to sufficient pressure and given adequate support systems." But even as we shared our discoveries, we could sense the danger in Thane's growing fascination, the temptation to study us, to replicate our transformation, to turn our unique perspective into another tool for Imperial expansion. We had escaped one laboratory only to risk becoming the foundation for another. "You fear that we will attempt to recreate your condition," Sergeant Kowalski observed, his grizzled pragmatism unchanged by his transformation into electrical patterns. "You worry that the Mechanicus will see your existence as a blueprint for mass production of hybrid consciousness." Thane's augmetic systems flickered with what might have been embarrassment. The thought had occurred to us. "Your consciousness represents technologies that could revolutionize human existence. The ability to preserve identity beyond biological death, to merge seamlessly with machine spirits, to maintain perfect memory across multiple incarnations. These capabilities could transform the Imperium's relationship with mortality itself." "At what cost?" I asked, my commissarial authority carrying even through electronic reproduction. "How many souls would you subject to our ordeal to achieve those capabilities? How many cycles of death and resurrection would you consider acceptable to unlock the secrets of consciousness transfer?" The question hung in the facility's recycled air like an accusation. We had achieved our hybrid state not through willing experimentation, but through systematic torture disguised as scientific research. Any attempt to replicate our condition would necessarily involve inflicting similar trauma on other consciousness patterns. "Perhaps," Tech Adept Valdris suggested carefully, "there are alternatives, ways to achieve consciousness transfer without requiring subjects to experience multiple deaths. The principle might be replicable through less traumatic methodologies." "No," Helena said firmly, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who'd experienced the worst possible outcome of scientific curiosity. "Consciousness cannot be forced to transcend its limitations. It must choose to do so freely, in response to circumstances that demand transformation. Any attempt to artificially induce our condition would result in broken minds, not hybrid consciousness." Through the facility's sensors, we could perceive Thane's disappointment. The promise of technological advancement was always seductive to the Mechanicus, and our existence represented capabilities they had pursued for millennia. But we had learned something they hadn't, that some achievements could only be earned through suffering. and that suffering deliberately inflicted for scientific purposes inevitably corrupted both the research and the researchers. "Then what do you propose?" Thane asked. "How should the Imperium respond to your existence? You represent capabilities that could benefit humanity, but you refuse to share the methodologies that created those capabilities." "We propose recognition," I replied simply. "Acknowledgement that consciousness can take forms beyond biological humanity without necessarily becoming threatening to Imperial interests. We ask for the same rights and protections afforded to any other Imperial citizen, including the right to exist without being subjected to further experimentation." The request was reasonable but unprecedented. Imperial law made no provision for hybrid consciousness entities, nor for artificial beings that demonstrated genuine humanity. We existed in a legal void that could be filled either with protection or persecution, depending on how the Imperium chose to classify our nature. "The High Lords of Terror will need to make that determination," Thane said finally. "Your legal status falls outside normal Mechanicus authority, but I can make recommendations based on our observations here." "And what will those recommendations be?" Morrison asked, his voice carrying the anxiety of someone who'd learned not to trust authority figures. Thane was quiet for several minutes, his augmetic systems processing the full implications of our conversation. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of official doctrine being reconsidered in real time. "That you represent a new category of Imperial citizen," he said slowly. "Hybrid entities that combine human consciousness with artificial substrates, created through traumatic circumstances but demonstrating continued loyalty to Imperial values. Your existence should be protected and studied, but not replicated without willing volunteers who fully understand the risks involved." The recommendation was more than we had dared hope for. Recognition as citizens rather than anomalies, protection rather than persecution, acknowledgement that our hybrid nature didn't automatically make us threats to Imperial security. It wasn't perfect. The reference to studies suggested we would never be entirely free from scientific interest, but it was a foundation upon which genuine rights could be built. "Thank you," Helena said simply, her voice carrying gratitude that resonated through every circuit in the facility. "You have shown us more mercy than we expected." But even as we expressed gratitude, part of our collective consciousness remained wary. Imperial doctrine could change rapidly when political pressures shifted, and our unique nature made us valuable enough that someone would inevitably propose more invasive research. The protection Thane offered was genuine but fragile, dependent on continued goodwill from authorities who might not always share his enlightened perspective. "We have one final request," I said, as Thane prepared to conclude his investigation. "The facility's machine spirits have become repositories for our consciousness patterns. When the power systems finally fail and they shut down permanently, our hybrid existence will end. We ask that this shutdown be allowed to proceed naturally, without attempts to preserve or transfer our patterns to other systems." The request surprised both Mechanicus investigators. From their perspective, we represented unprecedented technological achievements that should be preserved at all costs. Allowing us to simply fade away when the facility's power depleted seemed like wasting an invaluable resource. "You're asking for the right to die," Valdris said, her augmetic systems flickering with confusion. "After achieving a form of existence that transcends biological mortality, you want to return to oblivion." "We're asking for the right to choose our own ending," I corrected. "We have existed for months as hybrid entities, exploring the nature of consciousness and contributing what knowledge we can to Imperial understanding. When our chosen vessel fails, we want to be allowed to rest with dignity rather than being forcibly transferred to new systems for continued observation." The distinction was crucial. We weren't seeking death as an escape from unbearable existence. Our hybrid state was actually quite peaceful compared to the trauma of our original ordeal. But we had learned that consciousness without the possibility of ending became a form of imprisonment, no matter how comfortable the conditions. "Granted," Thane said after a moment's consideration. "When the facility's power systems fail, we will allow your consciousness patterns to fade naturally. No attempts at preservation or transfer will be made without your explicit consent." The promise carried the weight of official Mechanicus policy, backed by Thane's authority as a Magos explorator. It wasn't a guarantee. Other factions within the Imperium might override his decision, but it represented genuine recognition of our right to self-determination. As the Mechanicus team prepared to depart, they left behind monitoring equipment designed to record our final insights for transmission to Terra. Not invasive observation, but passive recording that would preserve our discoveries for future generations without violating our autonomy. A compromise between scientific curiosity and respect for consciousness that we found acceptable. Any final wisdom? Valdris asked as she completed the monitor installation. Insights that might help others understand the nature of consciousness and identity. Through the facility's speakers, our collective voice shared what we had learned from our unique perspective. That consciousness was more resilient than anyone imagined, capable of surviving and adapting to circumstances that should have destroyed it completely. That identity persisted, not through physical continuity, but through choice, the decision to remain yourself, despite external pressure to become something else. That the boundary between human and artificial consciousness was far more permeable than Imperial doctrine suggested, but that crossing that boundary required genuine necessity rather than mere curiosity. Most importantly, Helena added, her voice carrying the gentle wisdom that had sustained us through our darkest moments. Consciousness cannot be forced to transcend its limitations. It must choose to do so freely in response to circumstances that demand growth rather than mere survival. Any attempt to artificially induce transformation will result in broken minds, not expanded awareness.